Three aspiring rockers use toy guns to take over a radio station in the hopes of getting their music played. Special guest Jason Allen joins us to discuss Band-Aids on nipple rings, our favorite overture, and Raging Against the Machine. Then we find out if Airheads stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Allen have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says Gladiator with a glut. Allen says as a father, blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Allen have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Allen have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 426 of the Test of Time. I'm James Brief. We have had 425 episodes of someone whose first name starts with a J and whose last name is a first name. But today, we have a double dose of that. First, I'm going to introduce my co-host, Alan Noah. How are you?
Hi, I am doing very well. And yeah, we are joined by a very special guest. Joining us to talk about Airheads is Jason Allen. Jason, welcome to the show.
Hey. Hello, guys.
Thank you so much for joining us. This is your first time on the show. You had emailed us. You said that you wanted to come on to talk about this movie. And you could have picked any movie in the world. There's a million movies, but you picked Airheads. So why was that the movie that you wanted to talk about?
Well, as a young Gen Xer, I barely missed the cusp. I fall in a really weird category where I was too young for the Brat Pack movies. I mean, I saw them all. I love Ferris Bueller. Breakfast Club is a great movie in hindsight, but when they came out, I was just too young for them. Okay. And so there was a cusp of Gen Xers who, our Brat Pack movies weren't the Brat Pack. They were Mallrats and Empire Records and Clerks. Wayne's World is another one that comes to mind. They were post Brat Pack movies, and they were a little more modern, in my opinion, or a little more chaotic, depending on how you look at it. Airheads is one of those movies. It just came out at that time. It was constant rotation of basic cable. Yeah. When I was of the age of ditching school and sitting around with friends, and it's just one of those movies that I always really enjoyed. And, when you look back at it, it has a lot of big name actors in it. A lot of them. I mean, a lot of the people that were in that was one of their first, second roles when they were still hungry, young actors. So it's always been a great movie. I've always loved it. The soundtrack's amazing. It set the course for a lot of my teen and adult years, that movie did. I won't lie.
Nice. Would you call yourself like a metalhead?
No, I would probably say I aired more on the punk side.
Okay.
Especially now that punk is kind of mellowed out a little bit in a way. We have a lot of folk punk genre. Yeah. I mean, I do love me some metal music. Don't get me wrong. There are some industrial metal bands. I was a huge Nine Inch Nails fan. The soundtrack alone, the main song on the soundtrack is from a punk band called Reagan Youth, which is... Yeah. I mean, they're up there. If you talk to old punkers, they're definitely one of those, top 10 punk bands that if you're into punk, you should know about this 80s punk band. Right. Which is weird that it was passed off as a metal song, but it's got a catch to it. It's a catchy song.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say it's one of the best soundtrack movies. I think that might go to the original Crow or something like that. But it still has enough pre my generation and post my generation music. There's a blend. You got Van Halen and you got Motorhead, but it's also next to Reagan Youth, and I think there's a Lemonhead song in it. So it's a good blend.
I read something today where apparently nobody in the cast or crew knew that Degenerated was a Reagan Youth cover. They just thought it was some new song that someone had written for the movie, and then someone apparently, told them, include them in, and they were like, oh, really? Huh, interesting. And so, a lot of the people making this movie got that kind of punk education about Reagan Youth. So it brought people to it. It brought people to punk, even though it is kind of ostensibly a metal movie.
Definitely. And I think at the time that movie was coming out, with the Jane's Addiction and just the changing of vibe, the mid to late 90s was just a really weird time for music in general. It was a melting pot. You had some metal bands that would turn into grunge bands. You had some punk bands that couldn't decide if they were skate or thrash or hardcore. Suicidal Tendencies is one of them, where like, are they a skate band? Are they a hardcore band? Are they a punk band? And they really didn't fit any of those genres. So I think that there was a lot of confusion, and I think this movie speaks on that. It does. There was a lot of confusion and a lot of like, let's throw money at a bunch of stuff and see what's gonna stick. So
Right.
I wouldn't call myself a metalhead. I wouldn't. Going back to your question, I wouldn't say like I'm like death to all but metal. But I have seen some metal bands. It's an eclectic taste, which I think a lot of people from my era, especially Gen Xers, have a very eclectic musical taste.
I think that's really fair. And also, just kind of big picture, I think that labels are helpful and they're great at identifying things, but also sometimes they can be constricting. And it's like, I don't know, I just like music, man. Why do I gotta put a label on it? And I do think that our generation, I'm putting James and I in the same kind of category, people our age are just kind of fans of music. It doesn't have to be, oh, well, I like rock. Well, that means I don't like rap. Like, no, why the hell would you like one and not the other? This isn't an either or situation. I could be wrong about this, but the way I envision it is that older generations were more either or. Like they liked one kind of music and not something that was too different. But we figured out that you don't have to do that. That could be totally wrong, by the way, but I'm making that claim.
I mean, as an aside, rock and rap hybrids are some of the coolest songs ever in history, from Aerosmith, Run DMC to Linkin Park and Jay-Z.
Anthrax and Public Enemy, that's another one that they call out in this movie.
Ice Cube and Body Count.
Sure. But James, why don't you give our listeners a recap of Airheads in case they haven't seen the movie or they don't remember what it's all about?
Sure. If you're like me and you had never seen this movie in its entirety or at all, Airheads is a movie about a struggling rock band called the Lone Rangers, made up of Chaz, played by Brendan Fraser, Rex, played by Steve Buscemi, and Pip, played by Adam Sandler. Desperate for a big break, they take drastic measures by hijacking a Los Angeles radio station, hoping to get their demo tape played on the air. Armed with toy guns that look real, they hold the station staff hostage, leading to a standoff with the police. After their demo tape is destroyed, Chaz demands that the police find his ex-girlfriend Kayla, who has another copy. Chaz also asks for a record executive to come to the station, but when he does, Chaz doesn't like the terms of the deal that he's offered. Ultimately, the Lone Rangers get the music out to the world, even though they also get arrested.
Right. So now is the part where I ask you, James, how did this movie do at the box office? I kind of know the answer, and it's not great.
Right. Now, this film opened August 5th, 1994, and I actually saw the trailer for this, and it seems so obvious to put some kind of metal, even if the metal's not necessarily in the film. The trailer has the William Tell overture, which is a fantastic overture. That's
It's one of my favorite overtures.
yes, it's a great one. It's a great ringtone. But it's a terrible way to market this film. And this opened on August 5th, 1994. It had a budget of $11 million, and it opened at number 10 with $1.9 million, not even $2 million. Unfortunately, it limped its way to $5.7 million. But I know this film. I had never seen it, but I know that this film was a rerun forever on Comedy Central, like really late at night. And I'm guessing it must have gone for pennies, or it was basically part of some other package or something. And Comedy Central needed stuff to fill, and it's a pretty decent thing to put, Brendan Fraser, Adam Sandler, especially when you can get an Adam Sandler film in the later 90s for next to nothing. So I'm sure that's why it was played forever.
And that's where you found it, Jason, right?
Yeah, definitely. Or some cable channel. I think there was, back then you could you would see Showtime or Cinemax would just run the same movie for, 3 months straight. And
Yeah.
with one of the channels in the cable package, it was always running. That with Ferris Bueller's Day Off is another one that you could probably bet you would see somewhere. If you were sitting around at 2 o'clock on a Tuesday, you could skim through the channels and find Ferris Bueller. Sometimes you could find Apocalypse Now. There's just those movies that basic cable latched onto. And this seemed to be one. Mallrats was another one. It
Yeah.
seemed like I saw Mallrats 500 times on basic cable in the mid 90s. And movies that you might not have seen had it not been for that. Had it not been for basic cable, I might not have ever seen Airheads.
Right. It was in theaters for 2 weeks before they pulled it. So you really didn't have a chance. And I want to talk a little bit about the cast. Jason, you mentioned the cast in this movie. And the first thing that kind of leapt out at me when I put the movie on the other day was that the top build is Brendan Fraser, then Steve Buscemi, and then Adam Sandler. And I think part of my surprise at that was because I was mistaken. I thought this movie came out after Billy Madison, and that is wrong. Billy Madison comes out in 95. This movie came out in 94.
Right.
So this was before Adam Sandler was a movie star. This is when he was on SNL and people knew him if you were a fan of the opera singer on SNL and all of his bits there, but not everybody knew him. It was kind of a fight to have him be cast. Apparently, it was also kind of a fight for Brendan Fraser and Steve Buscemi.
Sandler had actually petitioned to get first billing, top billing. But
Oh,
he
yeah?
was told specifically, Brendan Fraser, he has movies, successful movies behind him, like Encino Man. And Buscemi, Reservoir Dogs had already come out. So there was a lot
Right.
of buzz about that film. So he kind of gave a little bit of cred there.
And I would even go so far as to say Brendan Fraser being an Encino Man, I would say Encino Man and probably Son-in-Law could also qualify as some of those movies that we were talking about on basic cable that you would see constantly.
Right. You also have Chris Farley in a small role, Michael McKean, who's kind of playing against type from Spinal Tap. In Spinal Tap, he is David St. Hubbins. He's a rocker there. Here he is like the suit, basically, the pain in the ass guy who doesn't understand rock and roll. Jason, you mentioned Brat Pack movies. Judd Nelson is here as,
Right.
Another suit, a douchebag record executive. You have two Ghostbusters in this movie, Ernie Hudson and Harold Ramis. David Arquette in a small role. Joe Mantegna, who I feel like I never see him. I only hear him as Fat Tony. Jason, was there anyone in the cast that was like one of your personal favorites, like when you watch this movie over and over?
I was very familiar with Encino Man, extremely familiar. Pauly Shore movies were like a thing. So Brendan Fraser being in it, I just remembered that he's the caveman from Encino Man. And Adam Sandler was huge in my world because he was on SNL. It does make sense that Steve was in Reservoir Dogs, but I don't think I had seen I think I saw this before Reservoir Dogs. So even that credibility, one of them that I'm really taken back by in hindsight is Michael Richards is his name, and that's
Yeah.
even
Yeah.
before he's Kramer. We see him bumbling around like Kramer before he even creates the Kramer character for Seinfeld, years before.
His most famous role, I think, is Stanley Spadowski from UHF. But he is doing the same bit, the same physical comedy. Also, in Airheads and UHF, he ends up in a supply closet. Very small detail. I don't know why that's worth mentioning, other than I will just mention anything about UHF whenever I am given the opportunity to do so. Moving on from the cast, I want to talk a little bit about the tone of this movie, because you have your heroes and they're desperate. They want people to hear their music. And so they break into a radio station, and they didn't plan on doing it, but like they end up holding everyone in that building hostage. And we, the audience, know that these guns are toy guns and they only have hot sauce in them, and that the employees of the radio station are not in any real danger. But they don't know that. And so they're not just fumbling good guys. They're terrorists, right? Like they are actual terrorists. And I was probably overthinking it, which is a thing that I do. But like, if I was in a situation where I was in an office and guys came in and put a gun to my head and told me that they would shoot me if I moved, and then later I found out, no, it was fine, they were water guns, I think I would still be traumatized and be pretty fucked up from that experience. And the idea of having your heroes be terrorists is odd. And I'm not saying you can't make jokes about that. I think you can make jokes about anything. You can make jokes about any taboo subject, any difficult real world subject, if you do it the right way and if you're respectful about it. And it just felt like this idea of having your heroes be terrorists doesn't work if your movie is a slapstick comedy. And I would call this a slapstick comedy. I don't know, Jason, would you agree with that?
I mean, I would say it has elements of slapstick. I personally probably gravitated towards this movie in my teenage youthful 90s MTV upbringing because they were terrorists in a way, like,
Okay.
and it's situational comedy, I guess. And I think the movie purposely goes to a place where he talks about, these guns are no longer available for sale because some kids got shot by police with them. And because that was happening around that time. I think there was like court cases and federal mandates where like toy guns could only be a certain color. And I mean, obviously it was a plot device in the movie as well, but I think that they definitely are criminals. Ultimately, they only did 6 months because they were famous rock stars or whatever it says at the end. It was a slap on the wrist. And that also is very tongue in cheek because like, didn't one of the guys from Motley Crue around that time get into a car accident and kill somebody drunk driving and never really he never really got in trouble for it. He didn't go to prison.
They mentioned that Vince Neil killed a guy, Razzle from Hanoi Rocks. He got sentenced to 30 days. He only served 19. Also, like the other people in that car crash were like really fucked up. Vince Neil was fine. He had a minor concussion. So yeah, that's a real thing.
I have to agree with you, Al. Watching this in a post gun crazy country, which it really wasn't when I was a kid. And when this film came out, to the fairness of the film producers here, I have to say I instantly sided with the wrong character. I instantly was like, oh, Michael McKean, he's cowering like a little baby. Yeah, he has an Uzi pressed to his neck by people that supposedly hate him.
Sure.
And it goes on a long time that the people kind of start even befriending the Lone Rangers, even though they still think they have Uzis and live ammunition there. So I feel like if Joe Mantegna's character, the DJ, found out it was fake early, but also knew quickly right around then, at the same time that the boss was going to sell them out and they were all going to lose their jobs, I'll bet he could have even kind of like been in on it a little bit, not even necessarily told the Lone Rangers, just to give the audience, at least give me a little bit of like, I don't like that there's people fearing for their lives here. Even the Kramer guy that's used for laughs, like that guy's petrified that if he doesn't do like a die hard, like crawl through the air vents, like he's going to die. Of course, I know what they were going for, but it's a modern world where, unfortunately, people have gotten into these things, these situations where it's not comedy.
I think the obvious solution is make it a really dark comedy. Like, have this movie be fucked up where the heroes are the terrorists and they're incompetent. Like, I think that could be really fucking funny if done well, and I don't think that movie has Michael Richards falling down and doing physical comedy. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I think that wouldn't fit in that kind of movie. I don't think that kind of movie ends with a happy ending where they get a record contract and just a slap on the wrist in jail. They probably all die in a hail of bullets. And like, there's something funny that happens with the demo tape. Like, it's gonna be destroyed, and then they find it, but then it gets lost when the station goes to easy listening or something.
Or it becomes a huge hit after they're all dead and killed in a shootout with police or something.
No. That's too happy. That's too happy for a dark comedy. I think you got to go really pitch black. I don't know. I mean, I'm spitballing here. I'm screenwriting on the fly. I think that there is something there. And I was reading that the director of this movie wanted it to be dark. The movie was directed by Michael Lehman, I'm going to say. And he directed Heathers, which is a really fucking dark comedy. It's about high school kids being killed. And I think, as I recall, it kind of worked in terms of tone. I don't really remember specifics, but in this movie, it just feels off. And to your point, James, about you're kind of rooting for the wrong people, if you're focused on the terrorists, shouldn't you be rooting for the cops? But like the cops are also incompetent, but there's also talk about like, oh, you can just beat up whoever you want. And police brutality is also a pretty tough real world subject that you can joke about. But is this movie doing it in the right way? Probably not.
I think that there's also an aspect during this era, especially in music, there was a desire to still be authentic. Like I think we've kind of lost that with the internet and the way music is now. Like it's kind of we self-produce and you have to be your own manager. But definitely in the 90s, there was this like, even choosing Reagan Youth, one of the most anti-government bands, as I'm sure there was an intention on someone's part to use that band or use that song.
Sure.
You weren't supposed to root for the suits, like the things that they were saying, like you're ruining music. You don't understand what's going on. You don't understand the little guy. We are rock and roll. There was some truth to that then, whether it was manifested by youth or marketing tactics or whatever it was, like clearly in hindsight, there was some of all of that. But at the time, there was this hunt for authenticity in your art, and I think that was one of the vibes that they were kind of trying to hit on with the movie, which I think they did, especially with the support of like, the support and all the rockers that showed up at the station. And, there is an aspect of rebellion or an aspect of like, at what point do we need to do something different? Granted, in hindsight, we are definitely a very different society. And like you were saying, I think that it would have to be very dark. Heathers is a very dark movie. Great movie. I love that. I love Heathers. Don't get me wrong. But it is a very dark movie.
Right. And touching on authenticity, that's a really good point because they do name drop Milli Vanilli in this movie. And it's kind of like a throwaway line of like, hey, we're real. We're not like Milli Vanilli. And 30 odd years later, I think Milli Vanilli is sort of just like, a pop culture footnote maybe. But at the time, that was a big scandal, I mean, maybe scandal's a bit strong of a word, but that was a thing that people were like, what the fuck is music anymore? And there's another line where I think it's the Harold Ramis character is like, you'll be the biggest thing since Marky Mark and the Funky Bunch. And they're like, they suck. But, they were big, even though they were overproduced and they felt kind of manufactured. So yeah, this drive for authenticity is a real thing, especially in the 90s, especially in rock and roll. And it really comes to a head in the third act when they're getting this contract and Chaz just keeps going back and forth with the record executive because he's like, okay, fine, I got that contract. Oh, wait, you didn't hear my music? Well, then I won't sign. Well, I heard 30 seconds and this is as good as you're going to get. Okay, I'll sign. But now you have to lip sync. Well, then I won't sign. For my taste, it kind of went back and forth too many times. But it's like that anti-establishment thing of rock and roll. Like, what's more rock and roll than saying, fuck you, man, I don't need you. But at the same time, in order for the rock bands to be successful, they do need the record contract from the douchey record executive and all that.
Which is why Rage Against the Machine does not tour anymore.
Exactly. You kind of need the machine. It's all well and good to rage against the machine, but if you want to be successful, you do kind of need it. That's why they go to the radio station in the first place, because they want that airplay. So you can say, fuck you, I don't need it, but also you do.
I mean, Justin Bieber is probably the first one I know of that he just became famous. Like, just go on YouTube and just start singing. And the Lone Rangers, they could probably make their own following online today.
I might be wrong, but I think it was Macklemore and Ryan Lewis were the first ones to have generated enough buzz. Up until that point,
Yeah.
you generate buzz and you make your own record, and then you get a record deal because you needed the airplane from the radios. And I think it was Ryan Lewis and Macklemore and Ryan Lewis that finally had enough buzz and had made enough money on their own and owned their own originals, where they said, no, we don't need a record deal. We're going to hire you for airplay. And they were the first band to hire the record company for airplay to create a number one hit single. And they owned all of their artistry after the fact, or more than any band before them. So there's definitely a change in the model. That leads me to another thing about this movie that I think is great. I think this movie does a very good job of being a relic and being set in a certain time in a certain place, but not leaving anyone confused as to why or where they are. And I don't think they intentionally did it, but I think anybody could watch this movie and maybe miss some of the jokes or miss some of the direct cultural references, but still understand what's going on, that there's a radio station and they need the airplane. I don't think it completely loses its structure because society has changed so much.
That's really interesting that you say that. I felt like there were certain parts of this movie that felt almost like dated at the time. So, like, this movie comes out in 94, and there's one throwaway line about grunge. Someone calls in for the tickets when, they have the station. He says that he wants tickets for some made-up bands, and then Chad says, oh, don't tell me you like that Seattle crap, do you? And if this movie is like, really embracing metal and it wants to be dismissive towards grunge, fine. You can treat grunge as a passing fad. But this movie comes out in 1994 when grunge was pretty big and metal wasn't really so hot. So it's kind of like an out of time thing at the time.
See, there was still a lot of animosity between metal and grunge then.
Sure.
Like metalheads were tried and true. You had your Slayer, your Anthraxes, your Ministry. I mean, Ministry was amazing. That would probably be industrial metal. I mean, there was a lot of people that bridged the gap and liked both, but you had tried and trues where they were like, I only listen to metal, I don't listen to grunge. And then you had the Pearl Jam fans and the Red Hot Chili Pepper fans that are like, I don't really listen to metal, I'm all about Jane's Addiction. So there was still that animosity within the modern rock subculture at the time, I think that's what they were playing on. Whoever was helping them with some of the jokes was very knowledgeable. I mean, because there's a joke towards the end when they're trying to send an officer in with a record contract. And he's like, if you're a cop, whose side did you take in the big David Lee Roth Van Halen breakup? And the guy's like, I don't know, man, Van Halen. And he's like, you're a cop, because that is an answer a cop would give at that time. It was like, so whoever was writing it, and like, there's definitely some people with their ear close enough to the ground to poke fun at the scene itself in a way. Yeah. To be knowledgeable enough to poke fun at the scene itself.
Yeah, you're totally right. I hear what you're saying. For me, the funnier question from that scene was when he says, who would win in a fight, God or Lemmy? And he says, Lemmy? No, trick question. Lemmy is God, which is like 30 seconds before Lemmy shows up in a cameo. But one thing that irked me a little bit about that scene, that's Harold Ramis, and they waste Harold Ramis. Last week in Brewster's Millions, I said that movie wasted Rick Moranis. This other movie has wasted a different character from Ghostbusters, and that kind of pisses me off because I love Harold Ramis. I mean, it's a funny bit, I guess, the Lemmy versus God, David Lee Roth versus Van Halen, but I felt like they should have given Harold Ramis more to do.
It's a very authentic metal line. A typical metalhead, somebody that was going to rag on grunge, would say that exact line, Yeah. I think that's probably what made it so funny, is that there is authenticity to it, to like, even somebody that like wasn't really a metalhead and was too young to see the movie at the theater, there was some authenticity to the writing in the movie itself, even though it was a very tongue-in-cheek black comedy slapstick. There was aspects to it where I'm like, this is my jam, you know?
Sure, sure. Well, along those lines with authenticity and the timeliness of the movie, another moment that really stuck out at me was when they're kind of yelling at the cops and basically accusing the cops of being brutal, I guess like police brutality, and they all start chanting Rodney King. The Rodney King riots happened in 1992, 2 years before this movie comes out. So that's timely, I guess, but also felt really strange to me because at this point, the cops are doing nothing. They're comically incompetent. They're not stopping the terrorists, even when they very, very much could, when they're like running around in the parking lot, and it would be so easy for someone to shoot him, tackle him, taser him, something, and they just do nothing. They don't do anything with the crowd. They let this crowd assemble and chant and do whatever they want. So I don't know why they're chanting Rodney King. And that crowd was pretty fucking white. So it just felt like tone deaf to me, like that they were trying to do something relevant that didn't feel authentic to me.
See, and I kind of saw that as like a response to the entire Marcus character. I think it's played by Reg Cathiv or something like that.
Yeah.
And that entire character and just the disdain and intolerance of all of it. I mean, there's a scene where Adam Sandler's like, I'm with you, man. Hendrix is God. And he's like, you're standing on my dick, man.
Right.
And I kind of saw that, like the Rodney King, as like they were tongue-in-cheek acknowledging it. There's not really a black presence here, and they're saying Rodney King, but they had this black character that was very anti-white man, which is great. I mean, even from his introduction, when he's just jamming on his guitar and he's like, I told you to knock when you come in my office, like his whole demeanor. So, and I kind of saw that as like playing into that character, that like we have this character, he's the strong black character lead who's definitely playing a black trope or an archetype of a black character, but
Right.
like they're still acknowledging it with a very white crowd, saying Rodney King. And I think that there was definitely an attempt to acknowledge that, because I mean, it is, you're right. It's a very white crowd screaming Rodney King. I think it's intentionally done to be like funny, to be like, what is really going on here?
I think you're right that it is an attempt. I feel like it didn't land for me because it just felt like, yeah, I see what you're going for, but
it doesn't work.
Yeah, you swung, but you missed, in my opinion, anyway. Well, let's talk about the climax where the Lone Rangers seemingly get what they want. They are going to play live, which, just as kind of an aside, seemed like a very obvious solution pretty early on that nobody had thought of, where it's like, oh, we can only get the tape and then we need to get this other tape. And when they were saying that they were going to take the tape out of the cassette after that cassette had been thoroughly destroyed, I was like, how though? That's not gonna fucking work. The executive flies in this whole rig, this giant concert rig, but it's all just for show so that they can lip sync. There's just so much stupidity that happens there where it's like, why would the record executive do that? Why would the cops allow this to happen? Why wouldn't anyone tell the band that they're going to be lip syncing? I felt like there was a lot of stuff in there where I was like, now wait a second, hold on. Like, this doesn't make any sense.
I mean, I suspended my belief when, I saw Stretch Armstrong get sprayed with chili sauce in the apartment.
Fair.
I do think there is an aspect. I know you guys have done Moulin Rouge.
Yeah.
And, Baz, the director, talks about how the intro of that is the curtains opening, and he said he wanted people to be well aware that they need to suspend some belief in order for the movie to work. And he said that was how he did that. He created this like opening scene. And I think that this movie does require some suspending of belief.
Fair.
There's a lot of things in the movie that's like, it's a little ridiculous. I mean, where Chris Farley rips the guy's nipple rings out, like, I mean, I've been
Right.
to a lot of shows and a lot of clubs, and I haven't, it's very rare to see someone walking around with piercings just accessible. If anything, there's band-aids on them because they're getting pushed around and they get bumped and it can hurt, so there's aspects of it that are like, it's definitely done for the movie. I do like that it was props, and I do agree. He flew in this big stage and flew in all this stuff and spent all this money to helicopter this stuff in, and then like it's just props. Like, why wouldn't they fly in the gear to begin with?
Right? I mean, like, it's a radio station. You would think they would have drums and guitars, and maybe it's not an MTV quality video that they'll get, but good enough. They're playing into this idea that this is a story, right? Like, this is on the news. People are going to care about this video. It almost doesn't really matter what the song is or how it looks and how it sounds. So let them do an acoustic set. Let them do something unplugged, or maybe, I don't know, maybe metal. That doesn't work right for metal. I don't know. I felt like the ending had a lot of things happening back and forth of, are they going along with it? Are they not? Like, what is the rock and roll thing to do? Whether it's to just pretend or to play for real or to not do anything. I felt like they should have played. I felt like that really would have been the smarter move. And then when it goes to like the kind of button at the end where they're playing live, finally they're playing, but it's in jail. To me, that felt a little anticlimactic.
The whole thing with the lip syncing at the end, I thought it played in character with Judd Nelson's guy, his character, that he would want to play it safe with the cassette that people liked. Maybe these morons, after a night of hostage taking, they might not play very well. So it's the safe bet, but to trick your guys into doing it, maybe just don't tell them they're lip syncing and they'll just play their hearts out and not realize that they're just sounding perfectly like the cassette.
Right, yeah, just don't plug it in.
I think there's the aspect where, like, providing them with props gave the Lone Rangers the opportunity to refuse to play. I was like 14, 15 years old when this came out. So that was like very important to me, like, oh, they're going to make him lip sync and he's not doing it, and he just stands in front of the fans and refuses to touch the guitar. I mean, that was like, that's amazing to a 14, 15-year-old young man. I mean, and I think that might have been written into the script to give them another opportunity to say, we're not going to be lame, man, because, I mean, there's always been that aspect of bands that refuse to play the Super Bowl because it's lip singing and because it's really hard to do, I mean, even the Red Hot Chili Peppers just did it, and they said, it was a great opportunity, and yes, it's lip synced because it's the Super Bowl.
Sure. Well, Jason, as our special guest, I want to ask you if you think that Airheads stands a test of time.
I do, for a couple of reasons. I get that there's some crude humor. It might not be for, really young kids, but like I said before, I think that it does a really good job of being entertaining and also providing some cultural basis as to like what the music industry used to be like, and it gives younger generations a window into a specific time, because if anything, it is very mid-90s. It is an extremely mid-90s movie, but I do believe that it stands the test of time. Some of the jokes might not have aged the greatest, the guns being one of them. I mean, it's we're in a different gun culture, but I think that ultimately it does stand the test of time. For now, I don't know, maybe in another 10 years it might not.
Okay, that's fair. We're talking about it in 2024. That's all we can say. We can't look into the future. James, what do you think? Do you think the movie stands the test of time?
I really like Brendan Fraser in this film because there are times in this film that you can actually tell that Brendan Fraser is the future Academy Award-winning Brendan Fraser. And that's at the parts where Chaz is genuinely frustrated that he can't get the message out. He's a great actor. However, I will not say that there's any point in time that you look at Adam Sandler's acting in this film and you say, holy shit, this guy is going to give what ultimately I'm referring to as the Uncut Gems performance. Like, holy shit, this guy is going to blow everyone out of the water with it, surprise everyone. He's not bad, but he's basically just his SNL buffoon for 90 minutes, and it's okay. Ernie Hudson, I love that guy. He's the cop that sympathizes with the guys inside, and he kind of gets that this is not just a simple hijacking. So I really like him. I did like the Michael Richards guy at first, but then I really did not like that gag. I thought the Die Hard at first was kind of funny, and then I really didn't like the side plot of another police officer that really wants to come in guns blazing, gives this guy a real machine gun. I also really didn't like a scene which is kind of supposed to be one of the climactic turning points in the movie. You find out Chaz's big secret is that his real name is actually Chester. And then he was also a nerd in high school, and you could tell because he was, handsome Brendan Fraser, school ties Brendan Fraser. And then someone in the audience is like, wait, I did Dungeons and Dragons. So I wasn't a fan of that scene. However, I did really like the music. Al, I'm going to admit, I didn't know that song. So I was like, oh, this is actually like That Thing You Do. They made a really good song for this film. I think overall the biggest problem for me of this film is that it's not quite funny enough. Al, you had a great idea with making it a dark comedy, but it's not a dark comedy. It's a PG/barely PG-13 comedy. It just doesn't stand the test of time for these reasons. That's 1 and 1, Al. 1 yes, 1 no. What do you think? 1994's Airheads, does it stand the test of time?
No, it doesn't. Sorry, Jason. And I agree with you, James. It's not funny enough. The thing that I will give it credit for is that the tone that it picks, which I would call slapstick, and even though we were talking before about genres being limiting, I mean, I would use that term even if it's not pure slapstick. It's consistent. It really stays in that lane, which is nice. But I think it's the wrong lane. I think this really should have been a dark comedy. I think that would have made this movie so much stronger. And I think that Michael Lehman, he wanted to make that movie. I think that he got a lot of pushback from the studio. I was reading today that originally Adam Sandler's character was supposed to have a neck tattoo. Nope, that was too edgy. The guys in the band were going to wear leather pants. No, that's too edgy. Like, no, it's not. Have you ever watched a video on MTV? This comes out in 94. Leather pants are very rock and roll and very common, but that was considered too edgy. So if that's too edgy, then yeah, they can't really go super dark and into some of the places that I think this movie could have gone and should have gone to make it, one, more interesting, and two, funnier. I think it would have been a different kind of humor, but I think it would have helped the movie out. And you see Adam Sandler doing the SNL Adam Sandler thing. You see Michael Richards doing the thing that he's really famous for. You have Michael McKean playing against type. Okay, that's great. That's fun. I love Michael McKean. I'll watch that guy do anything. You have Chris Farley, and he's kind of wasted, I think. He's not particularly funny. Ernie Hudson, Harold Ramis, a lot of these guys aren't living up to their potential, not because their acting is bad, just because there's not a lot of stuff for them to do in the script. The script is also bloated, I think, in terms of characters. There's so many characters and so many good guys and so many bad guys, and we like the girlfriend, but we don't like the girlfriend, but then we do like the girlfriend, and at the radio station we like the DJ, but we hate Michael McKean, but then we also hate the executive, and we also hate Michael Richards. Like, it just gets bogged down, I think, with a lot of this stuff that isn't funny, that doesn't really help the plot. And we kind of touched on this earlier, but the fact that it's 2024, looking at this movie from 30 years ago, yeah, it doesn't stand the test of time because it takes place in a radio station, a terrestrial radio station. Yes, they still exist. Yes, that is usually my default in the car if I'm driving for 5 minutes or less, but it's really not my go-to. More and more people are listening to music on streaming services in general, but specifically for discovering new music. Yeah, that happens on the radio, but a lot less so now. Now, if you want to be discovered, you need to be big on TikTok. And that statement will not stand the test of time. You know, if people listen to this episode in 10, 20 years, they'll say, what the hell's a TikTok? It's not going to be like that forever. I was doing a little research on this because I was interested in it and I'm a nerd and I like this sort of shit. But I found an article from 2020 that was talking about Driver's License by Olivia Rodrigo. And when that hit number one on the Billboard Hot 100, it had 8.1 million radio listens, which is a lot. But it also had 76.1 million streams. So, you know, the streaming is just so much bigger. It's so much more important. That's where people, especially young people, are finding music. And not only that, if, you know, some rock and roll band today did want to break into a radio station to get their music heard, well, what radio station would you go to? They're all owned by iHeartRadio or Odyssey. You know, it's not like these small little operations where it's a really big deal if this place goes from heavy metal to easy listening. Holy shit, that's like the only place I can go to listen to heavy metal in 1994. But that's just not how it works anymore. And in that very, very big picture way, I think that the movie doesn't stand the test of time. Also, neither here nor there, but it's a terrible title. Like, Airheads is a really shitty title that is just going to lend itself to shitty reviews. If you give your movie that name, you're just waiting for the crappy reviews to come in. And I appreciate wordplay. Like, I get it. Radio air, airplay, Airheads, but it doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you what the movie is. It's a pretty crappy title.
You know what I think your problem with this film is, Al?
What?
Your problem is with the writer, Rich Wilkes, or Wilkies. He wrote a movie called The Stoned Age.
Interesting. And, you know, it's funny, like, this movie is not a stoner comedy, but it's kind of in that Bill and Ted vein where these guys aren't stoners. They're not getting high all the time, but they're dumb. And so they're kind of just dumb idiots who mean well. You like them. They're not bad guys, but, you know, they just don't know what the fuck they're doing, which is also true of the Stoned Age.
Yeah, he wrote the Jerky Boys screenplay. He winds up actually having a huge smash in 2002. He wrote the screenplay for Triple X, the Vin Diesel vehicle.
Are you a fan of that one, Jason? You're kind of laughing.
I mean, that one kind of surprised me. I could see the Stoned Age. I get that. And especially the Jerky Boys. I mean, I had a Jerky Boys album, you know, so I could see that too. Triple X, I mean, good for him. He got it. He got a hit, because aren't they still making those? Or didn't they make like 9 of those or something? They made way too many.
They made several. And I remember seeing the first one in the theater. I think I liked it. And I never saw, you know, I never saw it again, I don't think.
I saw it in the theater too. And I saw it with about 15 of my friends, because Triple X is the movie. It was rumored or released that we were going to get to see that band Rammstein for the very first time.
Oh.
And at the time, they had that new single on the radio, on radio stations, a lot like the radio station in Airheads. They had that first song that had hit the American market, and everybody heard about this new German metal band, and we wanted to see who they were. And we had heard that they pretty much go on stage and light themselves on fire, which they do. I remember going to that movie with like 15 of my friends because we wanted to see this new band. We were curious. And I've often made the joke that Rammstein created Vin Diesel's movie career, because I know a lot of people that went to see that movie at the theater just for that reason, because this new band was like a new thing and we didn't have the internet then.
That's really funny. Well, Jason, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate that you reached out and that you talked Airheads with us. This was a lot of fun. And I got to be honest with you, if you hadn't picked Airheads, I don't know if we would have gotten to it on the podcast, because, you know, it's an Adam Sandler movie and I love Adam Sandler, but I don't know that this would have been on the list, on our radar. So I appreciate you bringing it to the forefront.
I appreciate you guys having me. I had a lot of fun. I mean, I kind of figured that it would happen, that I would come on and it would be nostalgia and a great movie, and you guys would be like, you are out of your mind. I had a lot of fun. I did. This was cool.
I'm glad you had fun. And I don't think you're out of your mind. Not even one tiny little bit. These things are subjective. We all love certain movies, and there's a lot of stuff to like about this movie. I totally get it, and I love that you're passionate about it.
It's nostalgia.
Nostalgia's a powerful thing. That's pretty much what we do here. That is our bread and butter, so it's all good. But yeah, thank you again for joining us. If there's any other movies that you would like to come back on down the road, please let us know.
Will do. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Thank you so much. This is all fun.
Yes, this was great. All right, well, that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, we are going to be talking about Outside Providence. I saw that this movie was celebrating its 25th anniversary, and I really wanted to revisit it. Have you ever seen Outside Providence, James?
I've been outside Providence. I've never seen outside Providence.
Okay, I'm looking forward to that. That'll be a good time. In the meantime, let us know what you think about Airheads, about metal, about radio stations, about terrorists who are really good guys. We are at Testing Time Pod on Facebook, X, Instagram, and Threads. And we'll see you next time, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.